Welcome to my conditional statement video. Let's just begin. Now, conditional statements are statements in Python that allow you to control what happens in one of your code. Now, I'm going to begin by describing logical operators, which can be used to combine conditional statements together into one line. First, we have the AND logical operator, which when used in a conditional statement will only cause the conditional statement to return as true if all the conditions set using the AND are true. Now, for example, if you did 1 equals 1 and 2 equals 2, the statement would only go into effect if both 1 did equal 1 and 2 would equal 2. If one of them did not equal what they're supposed to equal, then the entire thing would not return true. You can also add as many ands as you want, and the way you type an and is you first type your conditional statement and all its values, then you type the and then the second conditional that you also want to be true for the entire line to return as true. And you can do this as many times as you want and just end the last conditional with a colon like you normally would. And the main use for this is to make sure that a part of your program will only run in very specified circumstances. So you do the ands to make sure that that part will only run when everything is just right. Next, we have the OR logical operator, which is similar to AND, but also pretty different. Because instead of the line only taking effect if all the conditions set by it are true, OR only needs one of those conditions to be true. And this is always the case no matter how many ORs you have in an if statement or an elif, because you can have as many as you want. And this can be useful if you just want to have a conditional statement that has a lot of different that can be activated in a lot of different circumstances, and it's pretty useful. Now, the last logical operator is the NOT operator, which will only return true if the condition set by it is not the case. Now, you can type this by typing your if or elif, then not, then the values and comparison operators that you don't want to be true. And then you do a colon and write as you would in if. Also for OR, forgot to mention this, you just type OR in between all the conditionals, just like AND. You write it literally the same way. Yeah. Now back to NOT. Now NOT is not very useful because it just doesn't really do much. You can just type the opposite of what you want. Like for example, I did here. If not 1 greater than 2, print 1 is not greater than 2. You could just do if 1 less than 2, print 1. But so it's not very useful in my opinion, but it's the third logical operator. Now we're on to comparison operators, which are pretty useful. They're used to compare two values and then also to see if there's any logical operators. And if it meets that condition, it will return true. There are 6 in total. Basically, what happens, you use a conditional and then you use the two values and you use these to compare the two values. Now, the first comparison operator is the greater than or greater than symbol. This operator is used to compare two values and will only return true if the value that is pointing to is in reality greater than the other value. For example, if 9 greater than 6, this statement would return as true because 9 is greater than 6. But 9 greater than 10 will never return true because 10 is always greater than 9. You can also use variables for greater than 2, so you don't have to just use numbers. And for greater than to write it, you just use this. You do your conditional statement, then the value, then the symbol, then the greater than symbol, then another value, and then just a colon, and then all your code beneath it. Now next you have the less than symbol, which is essentially the same thing as greater than, but kind of the opposite. Less than will only return true if the value it is pointing to is smaller than the one it's pointing to, than the one it's not pointing to. Now writing the operator down is the same, just instead you do it to the left, and you do it the exact same way as you would greater than. Now we have equal then, which is written with 2 equal signs. Now this operator will return true if the two values, or 3, you can use this as many times as you want. Actually, no, if the two values are equal. For example, 1 equals 1 will always return true because of the same number, but if you were to use 1 equal 2, that would not return true. It never would. So, and it's a pretty useful operator because you can do it a lot of different ways, but one is a start screen. You can do if 1 equal 1. No, sorry, if game state equal 1, you call a function, for example, of the game start screen. Then if game equal 2, game state equal 2, then you can do that. And that's just one of the ways. This is a very useful comparison operator, probably my personal favorite, but now let's go on to the next one. Now the next operator is the not equal then, or and you write, by the way, you write this the same way as the greater than in the middle of the two values. And I'm just going to stop saying that because each one you do the same thing. You just write in the middle of the two values that you want to compare. So next we have the not equal operator. Now this operator will only return true if the two values it's comparing are not equal. And you write this with a exclamation mark and an equal sign. For example, 1 not equal to will return true because 1 is not equal to 2. Now this operator can be used for input validation to make sure someone does not type, for example, duplicate numbers in a program, because then it wouldn't work. Like if you were to, it is like asking you for a number and you didn't want to type a duplicate. If you did like 1 not equal 1, you could print what you want. And if you did if 1 equal 1, you could give it an error. This was a little example. Now the last two operators I'm going to combine together because they're basically the same thing. It's greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, and you just write those as the same way as greater than and equal than, just with an equal sign after. And I combine these two because they're the same as their original counterparts, but will also return true if the two values are equal. So they'll return true if the two values are, if like for example, if you use greater than or equal to, if the value is greater than the other one, then it would return true. If they are also equal, it will return true. So it's basically just combining the two in one. For example, if 1 is greater than or equal to 1, that would return true because they're equal. And if you did 1 is greater than or equal to 2, that would not return true because they're not equal, and 1 is less than 2. And this operator is just a useful conditional statement that, sorry, not. This operator is useful if you want a conditional statement that has both the less than and greater than equal operator in one line. So you don't have to make two separate lines, you can just combine them into one. So it's pretty nifty. Now we're on to the different conditional statements themselves. And there's only a few. I think there's 3. Now first we have the if statement, which is the basic one. And what it is used to is to check if a condition is true or false, and will then run the code below it if the condition returns as true. Now to write an if statement, you write to write an if statement, you just write if, then after it write a value, then a logical or then a comparison operator, then another value. Then you can use a logical operator if you want to add another if statement or something. You don't have to. And then once you're done writing the full line, you do a colon and then you click enter, and below it then you tab in. You got to make sure it's indented and then write code. And any indented code below it will run if it returns as true. Now this is the most common conditional because it's just basic. You can use it for a very wide variety of things. And you could, for example, use if 1 equaled 1, print high. This would print high because 1 does equal 1. And yeah, so it's pretty useful. And the basic if statement, biggest basic conditional. Next, we have elif, which can only be written after an if statement. Because what it does is it checks to see if any other conditional statements above it are true. And if none are, then it will check its own to see if it's true. It only does this when the ones above are false. So to write this conditional, it has to be the same. It has to be below an if. Like you have to have an if before, or it just won't work. And to write it, it's the same as if. You do the exact same thing, but you just write elif and make sure it's below an if statement. Now this is useful if you want to have different conditional statements in your code and you want to make sure that they won't all go at once. So make sure they each go one by one. So if the if statement's not true, then the elif will check just to make sure that the elif won't run if the if statement is true. So it's useful. And for example, if 1 equal 2, print high. Elif 2 equal 2, print hello. Now it will always print hello because this one's not true. So the elif will then check to see if it's true, and it is. So it'll then print that. Now the last conditional statement, which is else. Now unlike the first two, it cannot have any conditional operators in it, and it must be written by itself. So you just write else. The way you do it is you do else, then colon, then all the code below it. And what this does is it goes to check if any of the elif statements or if statements above it are true, and if none are, it will always return as true. Now they can be used to be your last conditional statement after a long line of other different conditional statements. So once they're all done, it's kind of like a last resort type thing where you'll print like an error, for example, if it's just something else. And you just use it, or you could just be the last one if you're lazy and you don't want to do it. Like, yeah. And an example of it, I'm going to do a few lines just because it doesn't work well. Otherwise, you do if 1 equals 4, print high. That's not true. Then elif, since it's not true, the elif will check, and it's also not true. And then you just click else, and it'll print true, basically. So it wouldn't print high, wouldn't print hello, it just print true. And this because the first two are false. Now, the last part of this video are nested if statements. Well, besides my conditional statements in my code, we'll get to that. Are nested if statements, which are another type of conditional statement that are essentially if statements inside of other if statements. And what will happen is if the first if statement is true, it'll run any code below it because you can also have an if statement and other code below that the first if statement, and then it will check if the nested if statement is true, and then run any code below that. And you can use this infinitely because you can put a nested if statement in an if statement. It'll just go on forever. And the way you write one is you just below it, indented below an if statement, you just write if, and another if statement inside of it. An example would be if 1 equal 1, print high, then if 2 equal 2, print high. Now this would print high twice because 1 does equal 1, so it'll turn as true and run the print high, so it'll print high, and then it'll look and see if 2 equals 2, and it is, so it'll print high. And you could keep doing this forever. I could put if 3 equal 3, print high, I can just do it forever. And they're useful if you just want an if statement that runs that has code that can sometimes run, like if you wanted to make sure that the second if statement doesn't run sometimes under circumstances, you can do that. It's also useful if you just want to have your code a little more organized and without using elif. So yeah. Now on to the last part about all the conditional statements I have in my code. Actually, I just want to make sure I'm recording. Okay, sorry. Anyway, let's get back. Now I'm going to get on to all the conditional statements in my code. Now I have a lot, but they're mainly if statements. Now my first conditional is an if statement in the main game loop that, if true, removes any pipes in my game if they go off screen. My next is an else. I just mentioned is the else, and it's for the if. So if this is not true, so if it's not true, okay. My next is an else for the if I just mentioned that updates the values of the pipes after any of them is deleted. So once this one not returns true, it will update the values of them. And then my next if is a game that looks is also in the game loop, and it looks to see if there's any pipes on the screen, and if there are any pipes on the screen, if there are any off the screen, it then adds a pipe on the screen if there's 0 pipes on the screen or 1 went off screen. Now I'm still in the main game loop, and my next if statement closes the game when you click the pygame quit button. You need to do this. It's if pygame.e equal pygame.quit, I think. I'm not sure. And that basically means, and then below it, I do pygame.quit. So if you hit the pygame quit button, it closes the entire thing. Then the next if activates when a key is pressed, and it runs the next statement, which is nested below, that adds 40 to the bird variable. Basically what the first one is, it's looking for any key presses, and if so, it then runs the one that looks to see if that key press is the spacebar, and then it adds 40 to the bird y, which makes the bird go up every time you hit the spacebar or jump. Now my next if is still in the game loop, and it makes it if the bird y is over 385, you get a game over, which just makes it if you hit the top, you get game over. I just wanted my game to have a game over, hit the top. I don't want them clipping through the top. I don't like that. And then my next if makes it that if the bird collides with one of your pipes, you get a game over, and it does this just by setting the game state to 0. If it's game state to 0, if it returns true, and then it returns that value to the top, so it can mess around the game state, which I'm going to explain in a bit. The next conditional is in the start screen code or the start screen function, and exits the game if you click the quit button, just like the one before. And also the next two are an if and a nested if, and one is the same as the first one, which looks down to see if there's any keys pressed down, and then activates the next nested if there is a key pressed down, and then that other one looks to see if there's a backspace, and if it does, it changes the game state variable to 2, which starts the game. Now the next if is in the game over code, and it just exits the game when you click the quit button. My game doesn't have like a restart from game over, which I'm going to try and code in later, but right now it doesn't have it. And then my next if is one of the last ones, and it returns true if game state equals 0. And what it does is if game state equals 0, it calls the game over function, and this changes the whole screen to the game over. Now my next is an elif, which is if game state equals 1. It instead calls the start screen function and just makes the start screen appear. And the last one is returns true. Oh, sorry. And then the last one is if game state equals 2, it then calls the draw function and starting the main game. And that's the end.